the Alpha King married the blind Omega to humiliate her, until she saw the wolf. He had lost. The court was laughing before Elowen reached the altar. She heard it the way she heard everything. Not with her eyes, which had stopped registering the shapes of faces years ago, but with the particular attention of someone who had learned to navigate a world entirely through sound. The whispers were not quiet. Noble ladies in their layered silks did not lower their voices for blind girls being walked like furniture through a royal marriage hall. She cannot even read the ceremony. She will not know when the vows end. Mire House sent their worst embarrassment as their finest apology. Imagine the insult. She will not even know when the king refuses to look at her. Lord Cassian Mire's hand on her arm was not the hand of a father. It was the grip of a man handing over a debt. He had told her 3 days ago, in the flat voice he reserved for logistics, that she was to marry Alpha King Dorian Vale. Not as an honor, as a demonstration. Mire House had resisted the crown the previous year, and this was the price of restored loyalty, an Omega bride from the back wing, the one who could not see. The one the house had kept hidden because her soul sight made the servants nervous and the lord uncomfortable. Elowen had said nothing. She had learned, at 10 years old, that saying what she heard about another person's wolf led to that person's servant being dismissed before nightfall. She had kept the silence long enough that it had become something almost like armor. The hall was cold and smelled of mirror candles, that particular waxy, metallic scent that always put a faint pressure behind her eyes, like glass moving in a place it should not be. She counted steps. She counted the echoes off high stone walls. She counted the sound of Dorian Vale's boots on the raised platform before she reached it. He stood above her, and she did not need to see his face. She heard 2 things where there should have been one. Behind him, a wolf soul breathed. But it did not breathe like something living. It breathed like metal dragged across glass, hollow, pulled thin, making a sound that had learned to imitate rhythm without actually having a pulse. And beneath it, very faint, from somewhere below the stone floor of the hall, she heard a second sound, a scratching. Not the shadow wolf standing tall behind the Alpha King. Something else. Something deep. Something that had not given up. The priest began the vows. Elowen reached the altar. She placed her hand on Dorian Vale's hand as the ceremony required. The mirror candles in the hall extinguished all at once. In the absolute dark, a sound rose from beneath the throne, a strangled, compressed sound. Not a howl, but the shape of one, the way a scream sounds when the throat is covered. Dorian pulled his hand away. Elowen lifted her face toward the place where she heard him standing. She said, "That is not your wolf standing behind you. That is the thing wearing its shadow." The silence was different from the laughing silence. Dorian descended the steps. His voice was very quiet. "What did you say?" Elowen did not step back. "Your real wolf is still alive, and it is scratching beneath your throne." Elowen had been 10 years old when she learned what her silence was worth. She had been in the Mire House gardens, which was one of the few places she was permitted unsupervised, and Lord Cassian had walked through with 2 of his advisors. She had heard his wolf from 20 feet away. It had smelled, to her senses, which did not use smell the way other people did, but used something adjacent, and harder to name, like a contract signed in someone else's name. She had said, simply and without strategy, that his wolf smelled wrong. The next morning, a servant named Dara, who had been bringing Elowen meals for 3 years, was gone. No explanation, no return. Lord Cassian had said, the following week, in the voice he used for things he wanted her to remember. A blind child should be grateful she is not thrown away. Elowen had understood then. The issue was not that she could not see. They did not hide me because I could not see. They hid me because I saw what their wolves wanted buried. She had kept her ability quiet for 15 years after that. She had lived in the back wing with its single window and its smell of old mortar. And she had learned to sort the sounds of the household the way other people sorted colors. She learned which footsteps meant a lie was coming. She learned the specific quality of grief in a wolf's soul after mirror punishment. That flat, swallowed sound like a note played in an empty room. She learned what it sounded like when a bond was forced rather than chosen. She learned, above all, what a hollow person sounded like when they had spent so many years performing a wolf that they had begun to forget they once had a real one. Dorian Vale sounded like that. She had known it the moment his hand had touched hers. His wolf shadow, the thing that stood behind him in the hall, that moved when he moved, that radiated the cold authority his court had learned to obey, was not his wolf. It was something wearing the shape of his wolf. And somewhere beneath the palace floor, the real one was still scratching. Dorian Vale had not always ruled like this. That was what the records did not say, but the walls remembered, in the way old places sometimes preserved what people chose to forget. Old healer Sarah, who had worked in the palace medical wing for 30 years, could have said it. She had noticed, after the mirror rite that Morwen performed during Dorian's 17th year, that the prince's hands ran cold. Not cold like a winter morning. Cold like something had been removed, and the space had not yet filled with anything warm. She had noted it in a private record she kept separate from the official medical logs. She had not said anything about it, because by the time she thought to speak, the prince who had once told a stable boy that a strong wolf did not need to frighten children to prove its strength had become a king, who signed orders in the voice of a man who had stopped asking whether the orders were just. The commands were efficient. Healing houses that treated weak wolves created dependency, so they were closed. Wolves who failed strength rites were a liability, so they were exiled. Mirror punishments were faster than hearings, so they were normalized. Loyalty oaths were easier to extract under duress than to earn over time, so duress became standard. Dorian Vale had ruled so long with a shadow behind him that the thought of his true wolf returning felt less like rescue and more like accusation. He did not know yet what the accounting would look like. He would find out. The morning after the marriage ceremony, Dorian came to the room where they had placed Elowen. He stood in the doorway long enough that she could hear him deciding whether to speak. "What you said in the hall," he began, "was true," she said. "You cannot prove it." "I cannot prove most of what I hear. That has not made it less real." He was quiet. She could hear the wolf shadow behind him, moving slightly out of step with his heartbeat, that half-beat delay that told her the two things were not, had never been, the same creature. "If you say this publicly," he said, "you will fracture the court's trust in the Alpha. The kingdom runs on that trust. Pack alliances depend on it. If they believe I am not whole, a kingdom built on your missing soul was already broken." She heard his silence land and harden. "Mire House sent you to embarrass me," he said finally. "If they sent you knowing about your ability, Lord Cassian knew what I can do. He thought it made me useless. He did not consider that it might make me dangerous to something he was invested in protecting." Another silence, he said. "If Mire House sends me mockery, I will return it crowned." Elowen turned toward the sound of his voice. A king who uses humiliation because he was humiliated has only learned the language of his captors. She heard the door close. She was not sure whether he left angry or thinking. With Dorian Vale, those things sounded almost identical. What she was sure of was that the scratching beneath the palace floor had been stronger. This morning, the real wolf was still there, still fighting. She intended to find it. The mirror candles were the worst part of living in the palace. The pain they caused was not the pain of light. Elowen had not reacted to light for years. It was more like pressure, like something rotating slowly behind her eyes. Like the inside of a mirror, if a mirror had a temperature, and that temperature was wrong. She learned which halls they hung in and began routing around them. In the rooms that held them, she could hear something overlapping ordinary palace sound, a kind of false echo, as if the air were practicing being something it was not. She began mapping the palace not by sight, but by what she could hear through its walls. She found the door to the mirror vault 11 days after the wedding. She did not touch it. She stood outside it and listened. Below the palace stone, below the roots of the building, in a space that felt colder than the cellars, something was breathing. It was not regular. It was the way an animal breathed after a long time in a small space. Measured, patient, alive but only barely choosing to remain that way. She put her hand against the wall beside the door and felt the scratching through the stone. It stopped. Then, very quietly, as if asking a question, one scratch. Then another, she said, in a voice too low for anyone in the corridor to hear. "I know where you are." The scratching paused. Then it came again, 3 times, fast, the way a wolf signaled recognition. She pulled her hand away and walked back down the corridor, before anyone found her standing beside a sealed door. Arn Vale was 22 years old and had been assigned to the Palace Gate garrison 3 years ago. Before that, he had been a stable boy. He had been a stable boy during the year of the mirror rite. Elowen found him when she traced the sound of a dream wolf in the palace halls, a specific quality of soul sound that she associated with people who were connected to a wolf spirit outside their own body. Most people who had that quality had lost something. Arn had something different. He had a window. She approached him carefully over several days, in the way she approached all things she did not want to startle. She learned that he had been outside the practice hall the night of Dorian's 17th birthday. When the mirror rite was performed, he had heard Dorian say through the door, "My wolf is cold." He had heard Morwen's voice, steady and clinical. He had heard the sound of a mirror shattering, then silence. Then the sound of a different kind of wolf stepping into the hall. He still dreamed of the young prince who had, the week before, told him that a horse who shied was not a coward. It was a creature that had learned that sudden movement meant pain. He dreamed of a wolf that was gold-warm and alive, and nothing like the cold gray thing that stood behind the king now. Elowen understood that Arryn was the closest living witness to who Dorian had been before the split. She also understood that Morwen would understand the same thing, if she knew. She made the decision to hide him. She told herself it was protection. She did not ask herself what it cost him to remain hidden. Morwen Vale was not loud. That was the first thing Elowen registered about her, and it was the most important. Loud people used volume because they needed to push their will against other people's resistance. Morwen did not push, she arranged. She was in the hall when Elowen arrived to present herself as Dorian's new consort, and she said, in a voice of patient concern, "The poor creature looks exhausted. Someone find her a chair. We should not expect too much of a blind girl adjusting to a new household." The mirror candles in Morwen's preferred rooms were stronger than anywhere else in the palace. and Elowen suspected this was not accidental. They caused her more pain than she allowed to show. She heard Morwen speak over the following weeks with the particular precision of someone who had spent decades making decisions that sounded like inevitabilities. A king with too much souls becomes a servant to every wounded thing. She heard this once in a corridor she was not supposed to be in. She heard it and understood immediately that this was not a belief Morwen had come to reluctantly. It was a foundational conviction. Morwen had taken Dorian's wolf because she believed a wolf, with mercy, was a liability to a kingdom that needed ruthlessness. She had not hated the young prince. She had simply found his wolf inconvenient. I did not take his wolf, Morwen believed. I removed the part of him that would have let this kingdom bleed itself soft. She was terrifying precisely because she was not wrong about what she had done, only about whether it had been right to do it. The mirror candles in the hall outside the Soul Review chamber flared when Morwen walked past them, and Elowen, who was standing in a doorway 2 rooms away, heard the specific note of her footstep change. She knew in that moment that Morwen had found out about Arryn. She moved quickly, not quickly enough. Arryn was arrested before she reached the garrison. The charge was attempting to weaken the Alpha King's bond through false dream testimony. Morwen's court herald read it in a voice that made it sound like a formal legal process rather than what it was. Arryn was placed in a mirror cell. Elowen did not see the cell. She heard what mirror cells did to a person over time. That hollow quality, that flat sound where a wolf soul used to breathe. She had been trying to protect him from exactly this. She had hidden his name and his testimony and his dreams, and she had given Morwen the time she needed to find him and frame him without any witness in place to challenge the frame. Dorian came to her that evening with a coldness she had not heard from him in weeks. "You knew about this guard," he said. "You knew he had testimony connected to the mirror rite. You kept it from me." She did not deny it. "I was afraid Morwen would use him if I surfaced him too soon. And instead she used your silence to find him and imprison him before anyone knew he existed, as a witness." There was nothing to say to that. Arryn said it better when she visited the mirror cell. He said it through the door, because mirror cell bars did not open for visitors, only for guards. "You tried to save my dreams by hiding my name. But a witness hidden from the mirror is only another reflection trapped inside it." She stood on the other side of the door and understood that she had done to Arryn the thing that had been done to her. She had decided, out of her own fear, that someone else's testimony was too fragile to be seen. She had made herself the judge of what truth was strong enough to survive. She had been wrong. Dorian began asking questions. Not gently. He pulled old command records the way a person pulls loose thread from a coat, methodically, without quite knowing what he was going to find, aware that the pulling had already started. The records had entries going back years. Healing houses closed for efficiency. Wolves exiled after failed strength rites. Mirror punishments authorized. Loyalty oaths renewed under duress. Elowen understood, after 2 conversations with him, that Dorian could not separate what the Shadow Wolf had decided from what he himself had wanted. The records did not distinguish. There was only his name and his seal and the pain that had followed both. She told him he needed to hear it from people, not records. He did not want to. She was not asking. Mara Thorne was 61 years old and had run the Eastgate Healing House for 20 years, before the closure order came through. She did not raise her voice when she said what she said. She said, "A child named Pip came to the door the night the house was closed. The closure was a royal order. I showed the seal to the guards. They turned us away. Pip died before morning. Dorian's court had recorded the closure as an administrative efficiency measure. It had not recorded Pip. Tomas Reed was 34 and walked with the permanent off-center posture of someone who had spent time in mirror burn, a specific kind of spinal tension that old healer Sarah had documented as a result of extended proximity to mirror right energy. He had been exiled after failing a strength rite, he said. I did not betray the crown, my wolf hesitated. The law said hesitation is weakness. I spent 4 years outside the walls with mirror burn on my back because your command decided hesitation was punishable. Noel Vale could not speak about his wolf. He sat in a chair in the hall where the sole witnesses met and was quiet for a long time, and what he said, finally, was, I do not hear it anymore. Dorian stood very still after each of these conversations. His court had recorded every command the Alpha King gave. It had never recorded whether the wolf behind the command was still his. The connection Elowen built was not fast. It moved the way truth moved in courts, slowly, and through people who had to decide whether the cost of speaking was worth the small chance of being believed. She went to Arn's mirror cell and spoke through the door for 2 hours. She told him she had made a mistake by hiding him. She told him what she was building and why she needed his testimony. She told him she could not guarantee Morwen would not use it against him. She told him the choice was his. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What do you hear when you listen to where his wolf is? She thought about the scratching beneath the palace floor. 3 scratches, fast. The signal of recognition from something that had been waiting a very long time, she said. Alive. Still fighting, not broken. Another silence. Then I will speak, Arn said. A wolf seen by one blind girl could be called delusion. A wolf remembered by witnesses became a truth no mirror could hold. Old healer Sarah offered her cold body record, the private documentation she had kept for 17 years of the temperature change in Dorian's hands after the mirror rite. Lady Isra, who had been at court since before Morwen's regency, offered the memory of young Dorian in the stable yard, crouching beside a horse that had shied, explaining patiently to a stable boy who became afraid of his own fear. That fear was not the problem. It was what you learned to do with it. Mirror archivist Thorne, who had been afraid of Morwen for 20 years and afraid of Dorian for 15, offered, finally, the original Mirror Vault registry. The record of what had been brought in. The record of what had not been permitted to leave. Lord Cassian Mire appeared in the hall, where witnesses were gathering, and said, with the specific tone of a man whose investment had not paid out the way he expected, that Elowen was still property of Mire House and could be recalled. Elowen said, A blind daughter is still a debt someone might be desperate enough to collect. She said, Then today I stop being your payment. Dorian, who was in the doorway, said nothing. But he did not look at Lord Mire the way he had looked at him a month ago. He looked at him like a man whose arithmetic had just been corrected. Lord Mire left without his reward. Morwen came to Elowen privately, the way she came to everything she needed to dismantle, with patience and calm, and the specific precision of someone who had done this before. She sat in the chair opposite Elowen's, without being invited and without announcement. She said she had come to discuss what was in both their interests. She said it the way people said things they have already decided will be accepted. She offered a compromise, she said. If Elowen agreed that her soul sight had been mistaken, that the wolf she heard beneath the palace floor was an artifact of her disability, and not a real soul, then she would be given a formal title, queen consort in name. A household of her own with staff chosen by herself. A garden without mirror candles. All the social protection a royal title could provide. She would never be asked to perform soul sight in court. She would never be called a burden again, she said. Let the blind girl be honored. Let the king remain whole in public. Elowen sat very still and listened to the sound of Morwen's wolf shadow, that flat, borrowed authority that ran like cold water under every sentence she spoke. She listened to the mirror candles in the corridor adjusting their frequency as Morwen spoke. She listened to the faint, controlled crack in one of the mirrors near the doorway as Morwen finished speaking. She thought about what she had been offered. She thought about the back wing in Mire House. She thought about Dara, dismissed before nightfall for no reason that was ever spoken aloud. She thought about a title given in exchange for silence. She had been offered versions of this for 15 years in smaller language. Comfort in exchange for pretending not to hear what she heard. Safety in exchange for calling her own perception a mistake. A place at the table. As long as she agreed, the table was the only place that mattered. And what lay beneath it was none of her concern, she said. A title that asks me to lie about your soul is just a prettier blindfold. Morwen left. That night, the mirror candles in the palace doubled. The scratching beneath the floor went silent. Elowen pressed her ear to the stone and listened for a long time. It came back. 1 scratch. Then 3. Morwen moved on the mirror vault 3 nights before the lost wolf chain was complete. Elowen heard it in the way she had learned to hear things that were happening in rooms she was not in, the quality of the palace air changing, the mirror candles responding, the sound of a soul-binding rite beginning in the space below the floor. If Morwen completed it, True Wolf's voice would shatter. Arn's dream witness would dissolve. Every connection the chain had built would go cold. Dorian would keep the shadow forever. Dorian found her in the corridor above the vault. He said, I am going down there. Not like this, she said. Morwen is destroying the only thing that, if you go in there angry, Shadow Wolf leads, you will be fighting yourself in every mirror. They will multiply your fury until you cannot tell what is you and what is the shadow following you. He stopped. She heard him stop, she said. What do you see when you look at what is left of you? A long pause. Nothing reliable, he said. I cannot tell my own thoughts from things I have been given to think, she said. I see a wolf that still scratches instead of surrendering. A longer silence. How do I go in without the shadow leading? You go in because you choose to, she said, not because you are commanded to, not because you are angry enough to, because you choose the wolf you want to be. He was quiet again, then, what do I choose? She said. Choose the wolf that can feel what you have done. He went to the door. He did not command it open. He placed his hand against it the way a person placed their hand against something they did not entirely understand, and intended to try to understand anyway. The door opened. Mirror Vault was not large. It was infinite, which was different. Every surface reflected, and every reflection was slightly wrong. The angle off, the shadow wrong. The figure inside the mirror doing something the person standing before it had not done yet. Elowen could not be deceived by any of it. She could not see appearances. She could hear what was real. She heard Morwen's steady, controlled breathing at the far end of the room. She heard the wolf shadow pacing. She heard the true wolf below the mirrors, below the floor, still there, still scratching. She heard Arn's dream, now a thread, barely a thread, being pulled by the rite Morwen had started. Morwen said, in the measured voice she used for things she had already decided, Mercy is only weakness with better lighting, Elowen said. Then your kingdom has been standing in the dark so long it thinks blindness is truth. The mirrors around her filled with reflections of Dorian. Young Dorian, Dorian as he was now. Dorian in versions she could not have imagined. The things the shadow might have done, with more time, the things the true wolf might have built with less interference. She heard Dorian stop in the middle of the room. She heard the shadow wolf beside him, making the familiar sound of a borrowed being pulled in one direction. She heard Morwen drawing the right to its final stage. True wolf's voice, that scratching, patient blue-silver sound she had been listening to for weeks, went thin, thread-thin. One good pull and it would break. The mirror candles in the vault responded to the right. The pain behind Elowen's eyes became specific and precise, not the pressure of the candles in hallways, but the sensation of a mirror trying to find something in her to reflect and not finding it. For one breath, she could not tell whether the darkness behind her eyes belonged to her blindness, the mirror vault, or every wolf that had been taught to obey its own shadow. Dorian took a step toward Morwen, not toward the true wolf. Toward Morwen. She heard it. She heard the shadow wolf's rhythm merge with his heartbeat for the first time. The delay that had always told her they were two things suddenly absent, as if he had stopped trying to find the gap between them. She said his name, not loud, just his name. He stopped. She said, "The wolf you lost is the one that can feel them," she said. The child outside the healing house. The wolf in exile. The hollow one who stopped hearing himself. She said their names, Pip, Tomas, Noel. She said, "Your court has those names now. Your shadow wolf does not know them. Your shadow wolf never needed to." A silence. The kind of silence that is not empty. The kind that is full of something deciding. Dorian turned away from Morwen. He walked to the final mirror, the one at the back of the vault, the one the cold radiated from, the one beneath which the scratching had been loudest. He placed his hand flat against it. He said, "I choose the wolf that can feel what I have done." The mirror shattered, not loudly, almost gently. The way something breaks when it has been under pressure for a very long time, and someone finally removes the weight. The true wolf came through. Elowen heard it for the first time, not as scratching, but as full sound, the actual voice of a living wolf soul, wounded and thin and alive, still alive, stepping into the space it had been taken from 17 years ago. Morwen tried to reach the rite's completion. The wolf shadow turned toward her, the mirrors around her filled with reflections she had not chosen. The rite, recorded in silver, the regency order she had signed, the proof of what had been hidden in the vault and why. She was taken before she reached the door. Dorian stood before the court 3 days later. The true wolf stood behind him, smaller than the shadow had been, more still. "Entirely real," he said. "My wolf was stolen. But the pain signed under my name still reached real bodies." He said their names, Pip, who had died outside a healing house because an efficiency order signed by the Alpha King had locked the door. Tomas Reed, who had been exiled for failing a rite that existed to determine strength, not worth. Null Vale, who could no longer hear his own wolf after a mirror punishment carried out under royal command. He reopened the healing houses. He recalled the exiled wolves. He suspended mirror punishments pending a full review. He freed Arn from the mirror cell and had the charge formally struck from the record. He stripped Lord Cassian Mire's guardianship over Elowen on the grounds that she had been delivered to court as political currency without consent or legal standing. He said, last, I will not call the commands of a stolen soul invalid. They were signed under my name. They will be reviewed under my name. Elowen stood at the side of the room, not on the dais. She heard the court adjusting, that specific quality of collective silence. That meant people were recalculating something they thought they already knew. The True Wolf Accord was signed in the archive room, with 7 witnesses, including Aaron, Mara Thorne, and Mirror Archivist Thorne. Its core provisions were not long. No mirror rite could be performed on a royal heir without public witness from outside the court. Commands issued under documented soul-binding magic must be individually reviewed for accountability. Hollow wolf punishments were abolished. No disabled ward or family dependent could be used as political currency in royal negotiations. Soul-sight testimony could not be dismissed because the witness could not see in the conventional sense. The Accord's final statement was one sentence. No kingdom shall call a shadow strong simply because it obeys without mercy. Elowen signed as Keeper of Lost Wolves, not because Dorian had given her a title, because the kingdom had created a role that had never existed before, and she was the person who understood what it required. He found her in the garden a week later. It was the garden without mirrors. She had requested it specifically. She heard him walk in. She heard his true wolf at the edge of the path. Not behind him the way the shadow had been, close and controlled, but beside him at a small distance, the distance of a wolf that was still healing and did not want to crowd anyone. She heard it sit down, Dorian said. What does it look like now? She considered the question honestly. Wounded, she said. He was quiet. And me? She said, listening. He sat down on the wall at the edge of the path, which she knew from the sound of the stone. He said, I will not make you the proof that I am whole. Elowen turned her face toward the sound of him. Good, she said. I am not a bandage for a king. The true wolf made a small sound, not a growl, not a whine, the sound a wolf makes when it hears something it recognizes. They stayed in the garden for a while. Neither of them said anything that required an answer. The mirror vault was converted to a soul review chamber. The mirrors were removed and replaced with record walls, documented accounts of wolf soul separation cases, testimony from hollow wolf victims, records of what mirror punishment had cost. Arn became the first official dream witness, with a formal legal status that had not existed before. Mara Thorne reopened the Eastgate Healing House. Tomas Reed returned to the capital. Nal Vale, who had not heard his wolf in 4 years, sat in the new review chamber on a quiet afternoon and heard something very small and very far away. Old healer Sarah noted in the formal record that the temperature of Dorian's hands had changed. She had been waiting 17 years to add that entry. Elowen was in the hall when a young wolf came to the review chamber for the first session. The wolf could not have been more than 15, he said, to Elowen and not to the king. If I cannot see my wolf, does that mean it is gone? Elowen tilted her head. She heard what was behind his question. She said, no. Sometimes it only means someone taught you to look in the wrong place. The court had once laughed because the bride could not see the king's face. But under Elowen's watch, Vale Kingdom learned that sight had never been the same as truth. The mirror could flatter a crown. The eye could follow a shadow. But the soul always knew the sound of the wolf scratching to come home.